Esther about again? Was it about good people saving the Jews from a certain genocide? Yes or no? No. No, it's not about good people saving the Jews from a certain genocide. It's about a good God using imperfect people to accomplish his redemptive work. That's what the book of Esther is about. That's what we have to remember kind of continuously through the book. You know, God uses people. God wants to use you and me, and he used Esther as a great, great example. And Esther had a significant role in the history of the Jewish people, of God's people. But even Esther, which we saw in particularly like 2 weeks ago, we saw that Esther was also not perfect. But God was working through her, and God was using her, and God is also slowly changing her. And today we will see a significant change in her life. So, what have we seen so far in the book of Esther? Let's just quickly recap. You know, we're going to look at chapter 4 today, but we saw in chapter 1, we got introduced to a foolish king, but a powerful one. The most powerful person at that time, King Xerxes or Ahasuerus, just two different names for the same king. But he is a foolish king. He was just consumed with his own glory. He just wanted to show everyone, look at me, come worship me, because it's about my glory. And he lost everything that really mattered to him. He lost his wife, his queen. He lost, in the meantime, in the next 4 years, he lost a huge battle, so he lost a big part of his pride. He was in it for his own glory, but everything that really matters to you, you lose. Because if it's only about you, people will go away. So he lost his wife and his queen. But we read in chapter 2 that he got another wife, which is Esther in this instance, and he made her queen, but he did it in such a perverse way to select Esther eventually, after collecting all the beautiful young women, girls, maybe even in the kingdom, to have them come over for a sexual audition so he could choose his next, wife or victim. Or anyways, Esther is being chosen, and then we come into chapter 3, which you guys have been hearing about last week, where you see that something is happening there. So the scene is set. First, the king gets disposed of Queen Vashti. Esther is introduced. Esther is getting into position. And even through all this mess, God is still in control and leading and guiding it. So even in a world full of sin, God is still above it, because he puts Esther in position, in place. Chapter 3, we see that there is a conflict between Haman, which is a very, very powerful guy. He's kind of the second in position. It's okay. He's the second in position in the kingdom. And Haman is a very, very proud guy. He wants everyone to bow for him. So when Mordecai, Esther's cousin, decides to not bow for Haman, because there was kind of a enmity between the two families, really, from way back. So Mordecai decides, no, I'm not going to bow for you, because God has ordained something else. All right. Look, now we get the solid stuff. Very good. Thank you. Okay, now we can preach, right? Okay, let's do this. Okay, so Haman and Mordecai, that's this enmity. So Haman comes from a line which God previously had said, okay, to King Saul, because the family of Haman, they wanted to destroy the Israelites. God had ordained and said to King Saul, okay, you have to destroy these people because they are after my people. And King Saul didn't completely obey God. So Samuel had to step in and basically had to kill Auke, which was the leader of the tribe of the line of Haman. So Haman still had a kind of a hate towards the Jews because Samuel killed his kind of previous leader. But Haman didn't decide to just go after Mordecai. No, he said, no, Haman is more vicious. He said, he thought by himself, okay, I'm in such a powerful position here. I'm going to do it in such a way that I'm going to kill all the Jews. This is what I'm planning to do. Now, he's able to talk King Xerxes into it, to kill all the Jews, because the Jews, they are having their own laws, they are having their own ways. Really, they're even worshipping a different god instead of you, King Xerxes. How is that? That cannot happen. You can't tolerate that. So King Xerxes sends out a decree to his whole empire. On a certain day, all the Jews shall be killed and robbed. Now, this is vicious. This is quite something. At that time, the estimates are that roughly 15 million Jews were living in the Persian Empire, about 15 million. So the decree goes out on this and this day, about a year from now. All those 15 million people, we're going to kill them and we're going to rob them. Everything you grab or you can take, you can keep it. Wow. This pursuit to kill God's people and to compromise God's plan is vicious. And the thing is, it is not new. It has been happening from the very, very beginning. Since the fall, Satan has been attempting to compromise God's plan continuously. So we see it happen in the garden, where Satan tempts Adam and Eve. They fall in sin, in rebellion to God, away from God, broken relationship with God. We see it in Egypt, where Pharaoh pursues God's people to destroy them because he's so mad that God has delivered them. We see it now happening in Susa, in the Persian Empire, that there's a plan to kill 15 million Jews, God's people. We see it when our Jesus was born, that King Herod at that time, he sent his soldiers to Bethlehem to do what? To kill all babies below 2. It is crazy. What a sadness. To eliminate every possibility that this King Jesus will live to accomplish his plan. We see then later that Satan attempts to tempt Jesus, to even get Jesus himself off track, to tempt him with all the things of the world. But no, Jesus points to God's word, and he stands and he continues his plan again and again. Because again and again and again, if you haven't seen it by now, again, and Satan is not really succeeding. He's tempting, but he's not succeeding. Now, later on, we see that Satan even enters Judas to come up with a plan to kill Jesus again. And then they crucify him, thinking that they might have won. But then Jesus comes back alive, conquering every power of Satan, sin, and death. Now that is how the story of history goes. And here we are today, looking back at the last 2,000 years. Well, it's been in the news a few times, the Holocaust. Wow, what a huge attempt. 6 million Jews killed. Now, I don't know if there's any Jews here, but my goodness, what a thing is that. 6 million deliberately killed. Wow. Satan is vicious, and there's no sign that he is stopping yet. Right? Anti-Semitism is rising again. But besides that, if we look at God's people, then we are included now in God's people. Christians are included in God's people. Well, I don't know if you're aware of anything called Open Doors. Does someone know this Open Doors, this organization? Every year they come with a list of countries where Christianity is persecuted the most. Well, my goodness, the numbers are just staggering. 312 million Christians are being persecuted severely to extreme. It's just, and here we are sitting, right, in freedom, in comfort. And then there's 47 million on top of that experience severe persecution. So in total, 361 million. Well, Satan is still going around like a roaring lion. He is still pursuing to get God's people, and in so many different ways. The Western church, I think the Western church is being overrun by now and overthrown almost by cultural values about marriage, about, well, really about everything. About marriage, about gender, about money, about career, about success, about what really matters, about our integrity. All these things are being overrun, and we see that some churches even go with it, sadly. One of the things when you talk about killing people, and this is the plan, Haman is planning to kill 15 million Jews, not only the men, but the women and the children, everyone. But if we think, for example, about today, about abortion, like it's a terrible thing to kill people. And I call them people because the Bible calls them people. Then it's shocking. Since 1973, in the US alone, between 50 to 55 million only registered abortions, which would make up by now about 17% of the whole US population. When we look at the Netherlands in 2019, in 1 year time, 32,233 registered abortions. From 1984 to 2019, since we've been registering it, over 1 million, only in the Netherlands. 6.5% of the current population. Like this attack from Satan on God's people, on God's ways, it is vicious and it is continuous. And I'm sad to sum it all up, but it's the reality at the same time. And the thing is, we should be sad about it. And what we will read now is that the Jews in that time and Mordecai were sad about it. I'll read you the first 3 verses of chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, about the decree being sent out, the plan of Haman, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city. And he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate, clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king commanded, and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Mordecai heard the news, the Jews heard the news, and of course the natural response would be to be very sad, to mourn, to start fasting and praying, and what's going to happen to us? Is this real? This is horrible. Now this is real, and they are sad and they are mourning, and we have so many, and we've summed them up, we have so many reasons really to be sad about, to mourn about. but also maybe to, and we'll see, to fight for. Because apparently there's something at stake, perhaps. Well, I'm pretty sure there is. But what we also see here is we see this terrible plan unroll. What we also see here, and that is something kind of beautiful in the midst of it, is that Mordecai's faith is kind of being activated. The faith of the Jewish people are being activated because they start to fast, they start to mourn, and fasting kind of always goes hand in hand with praying, because you're fasting to do what? To cry out to someone. Now for the Jewish people, that has to be God. That has to be their God. Now that is something that happens more often. This is not just for this occasion, but even if you look at it statistically, when do people come to faith? People come to faith, and at 90% plus people who come to faith are being born again. There's an element, one of the two or both elements are present. One, they go through deep hardship. They have difficulty in their life. The big questions finally come up. Like, what am I doing here? Where am I going? What is this all worth for? Or, and a combination of, they see with a friend or a relative or a family member, they see an authentic faith. They see at someone that's close to them, they see, hey, but your trust and your faith in this God, it's real. So it's a combination of the two or one of the two. And it happens, and it is present at more than 90% of people who come to faith. Now that's significant, right? So hardship sometimes has even though it's difficult, has a beautiful function, because it can activate your faith, and it can activate your search for God. And that's what many people will tell you and witness about if they look back at their life. And I'm sure there's people here, sitting here, that have had difficult times. But if they look back at it, they think, okay, I don't wish it on anyone. But at the same time, it gave me such growth spiritually. Right? Wow. Maybe you can share about that maybe during coffee, how that worked for you. At the same time, when we talk about mourning, like mourning in the Eastern setting, in our Western world, I'm not aware of all the cultures here, how that goes in different cultures, but in our Western world, like Europe, America, we don't really do mourning well, right? It's most of the time, how are you doing? I'm fine. No, oh yeah, we're good. I don't, and we kind of feel like I don't really want to bother you with and I don't really want to get all emotional. Well, where in the Bible does it say you should not get emotional? Where in the Bible does it say you should not share your burdens? I'm pretty sure that the Bible actually encourages you to do it, because mourning is good to do. It is important even to mourn and to share. Why? First of all, it's a very kind of common and well-known moral standard. It's being honest, right? If you're not well and you say you're well, what are you doing? You're lying. You're kind of lying. And of course, I know that not in every conversation you can elaborate on everything that's going on, but we get the principle, right? If you have someone who's genuinely asking you, hey, how are you doing? And just say, oh, I'm fine. Well, be honest, because God himself even weeps. We see Jesus weep in several occasions. And this is a thing that happens as well. If you don't grieve, so if you don't let it out, eventually you will break. And that will happen often in our Western world in ways of stress and burnout. You will break because you have just been bottling it up. You just have been pushing on, but not in a healthy way, until it's just full, and you get stressed out, burned out, and it stops. Now, I'm not saying that stress and burnout are that only kind of not grieving causes that. There might be other reasons for it, but one of the reasons might be that. And if you grieve and you share, you allow others to love you and to know you. If other people don't know where you're going through, they don't know you. They know something about you, but they don't really know what you're going through, how you're feeling. And for a lot of us, it's difficult to let other people love us. And it's not an accident, because our society, what is our society based upon again? How did King Xerxes how did he test it again? What were his two standards? Looks and performance, right? Well, what is it today? When we look at the television, when we go to work, we have to look good and we have to perform well. It's not much different. It's really not much different. Now, first question is, how are you doing in your mourning? How are you doing in sharing your difficulties? How are you doing in letting other people love you? Now, first, let's move on to the next verses. Verse 4 to verse 11. Because Mordecai is mourning, God's people are mourning, and apparently Esther is sitting in a way in her palace, being completely unaware. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her that Mordecai was sitting there, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So she didn't know what was going on yet. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasure for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that if any man or woman goes into the king inside the inner court without being called, there's but one law to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, so that he may live. But as far as me, I have not been called to come into the king in these 30 days. Sorry for my erratic reading. So, what is happening here? Mordecai is going to the king's gate because he wants to make Esther aware of what's going on. So, people report to Esther like Mordecai is sitting there in sackcloth and ashes, and he's kind of making a bit of an embarrassment for himself. And Esther sends someone there to find out what's going on, and Esther sends some clothes there so that he would change his clothes, because that's also what King Xerxes only wants to live in an environment where there's no bad news, ever. So he wants all grieving, sad people away from him. They were not really allowed even to go that close. So this was Esther's natural response, to bring some clothes. Please change and tell me what's going on. But Mordecai doesn't accept, Esther gets really more distressed. Like, okay, what's going on with, with my nephew? So she sends Hathach, and Mordecai explains on Hathach what the situation is. Gives him even the decree, the written decree, to show it to Esther. And Mordecai makes a plea and asks Esther to make a big decision. So Mordecai asks Esther now, okay, now it's time for you to make known to the king that you are a Jew, and you need to plead with the king for God's people. This is what Mordecai is asking of Esther. Now Esther, she's now in a predicament, because she's now in a difficult position. She is in a position, but it is a difficult one. And she's not hesitant to let Mordecai know why she shouldn't do it. Because she lets Mordecai straight away know, wow, Mordecai, you know that if anyone comes before the king without being called by the king, well, the outcome is most likely being executed. That's the most likely outcome. So you're asking me to go to the king and most likely being executed. That's what you're asking me. And besides that, the king hasn't asked for me in 30 days, so maybe I'm a bit out of favor. I don't know. So in other words, Esther finds herself in a predicament. She's in a predicament. If you're really critical, you could say, is she making excuses? Well, maybe to some extent it's an excuse, but it's an understandable one, right? Now, Esther's in a predicament. She has to make a difficult choice. But are we not all experiencing predicaments? Are we not all experiencing choices we should make, but we're not making because maybe your predicament is, I know I should start reading the Bible more often just by myself. And not just read it, but actually read it. Not just go over it, but actually take it in. I know I should pray more. I know I should pray for my family. I know I should do that, but I just don't. Maybe that's your predicament. Maybe your predicament is joining one of the fellowship groups. It will take time, yes, and it will take energy also, but it will also give you blessings. It will also give you fellowship. It will also give you encouragement. It might also give you direction and clarity on certain matters. Maybe your predicament is financially. Maybe it's time to start giving. Maybe your predicament is at work, to start standing up and say, hey guys, don't know if you're aware, but I'm a Christian. And if you want to hear something about it, why I'm a Christian, I love a cup of coffee and share and talk about it. Maybe your predicament is maybe even a bit more tenseful, that in certain situations that there's different views on ethical questions, like abortion, for example. And that maybe you should stand up for life. God is giving life. Satan wants death. And that you just say, well, I can't stop certain people making certain decisions, but here's where I stand and here's why. And just giving some examples. Might be something completely different for you. But what is your predicament? And the thing is, and this is encouraging, Esther had a predicament, right? And she had a tough one. Her life could potentially depend on it. But she is making huge progress because she is going to decide to step up. Now, if God is working in and through Esther, and if God is changing Esther's life, changing her heart, then God can change your life, God can change your heart, and God can give you the courage to make the right decisions as well. So what does Esther do? verse 12 to 17. So, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said, the reasons why she maybe shouldn't do it. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Then Esther told him to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf. And do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I am a young woman, will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So, Esther is making a big decision here. But before she does, Mordecai has to kind of convince her a bit. Because Esther comes with the 2 excuses why she shouldn't do it, and then Mordecai comes back and he makes 3 points to Esther. And he says, well, first of all, Esther, I'm sorry to say, but don't think that you're going to be safe in palace. If you're not going to do anything, don't think you're going to dodge the bullet. Because someone, and Haman is vicious enough, someone will find out. So don't think you're safe. Secondly, Mordecai is saying, if you don't speak up, if you don't step up now, God will do it in another way. God will deliver his people in another way. And which is a very significant point in the book of Esther to remember. Otherwise, we still tend to go to Esther is the hero. No, God is the hero. Because what is Mordecai is expressing here? He's expressing faith in God. He's not expressing faith necessarily in Esther, although he's kind of employing Esther to say, okay, come on, step up, do your part. But bigger than that, Mordecai is saying, no, you have your responsibility. You have your choice to make now, but regardless, God is above it. He will rescue his people. He has done so in history, and he will do so again. Amen. That's right. So this is how it's going to go. And this is an important thing, because here we see that Mordecai's faith is really kind of ramping up. And this is beautiful. It's like, it's like God is the captain of a huge cruise ship, and the cruise ship is sailing away from, Los Angeles. And it's going to, now London is not is Liverpool a place to, anyway, Rotterdam. Going to Rotterdam. Now, who's in control of the ship, where the ship goes? The captain. He's the sovereign. He is God. But all the people who are on the ship can make all different kinds of choices, right? They can lie, they can cheat, they can rob, they can kill, they can, whatever they can do. But as long as God, the captain, is the sovereign, the ship will come to Rotterdam. Now, this is kind of how Mordecai kind of expresses his faith in God. This is a ship, it's going, and it's a really tough situation. You have a choice to make how you're going to act and behave and participate. But it's beautiful that Mordecai says now, but God is ultimately in control. Now, that is an important one. So, but he does say to Esther, like, this is God is calling you to do this now. If you don't, you're going to live to regret it. So it's your responsibility to take this choice. And thirdly, Mordecai puts it like in a famous way, haven't you become queen just for a time like this? Hasn't God in his providence kind of removed Queen Vashti, led it in such a way that you became queen and now in this position, in this place. Is that not God's beautiful providence? How God is leading and guiding things. Now, this is quite convincing to Esther. Now, so Esther decides to step up. But before we go there, if we believe in God's sovereign providence, right, that He has everything in His hand, that He has your and my life in your hands. Now, He posted Esther there in the palace of the Persian Empire. Now, the question, and it's obvious, of course, where has God posted you? Where has God posted you? I know from quite a few, He posted you at ASML. Right? Well, hasn't He posted you there, maybe perhaps just for a time like this? Where things go haywire, where people are lost, where people are getting burned out, where people maybe don't know where to find the life answers. Now, where has God posted you? In your family, in your neighborhood, at your work. Where has God posted you? Perhaps just for a time like this. Now, Esther decides, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to intercede. I'm going to make this decision. So Esther decides, she goes from kind of passive, living her royal palace life, to going active. And so she's making spiritually a lot of progress, because this will take a lot of trust. So she calls for a fasting to reach out to God, to ask Him to help her, to kind of increase her chance of success. But really, I think fasting is more that you surrender yourself to God. And really, this is what we see here as well, because she's calling for a fasting while she is saying after that, if I perish, I perish. So I think Esther is calling, okay, call for a fasting that we may surrender ourselves to God, and that I might be helped to surrender myself to God. And of course, we ask God for success. That it might be successful and that the king will not execute me, that he will listen to me. Of course, that's also what you pray for. But Esther somehow realizes you can't manipulate God. And therefore she says, okay, but even if I perish, I perish. Now, I think that's a healthy biblical view on fasting and on prayer. Not to manipulate God, not to claim things, not to speak things into existence and then kind of expect that because you've spoken it will be. No. We bring things to God, we ask God, and we expect it from Him, because when He speaks, things come into being. And of course, our words have power, our words have significance, but not divine significance. No. Of course, we can break people with our words. Oh yeah. And we can build people up with our words. Yes, but they don't have this magical divine power. Now, what is our decision? What is our purpose today? Wherever God has posted you. Romans 10, verse 14 and 15, for example. It says there, how will people call on to Jesus if they've never heard of Him? And how will they ever hear of Him if no one speaks of Him? So if we talk about words, we need to speak the gospel. We need to tell people the gospel. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 18, we're ambassadors of this ministry of reconciliation, of the reconciliation between men and God through the gospel. 1 Peter 9, 2, verse 9 and 10, we're a royal priesthood. We're once we were no people, now we're God's people, And Matthew 28, of course, where Jesus says, to me given is all authority. Go therefore and make disciples, baptizing them and telling them all that I have commanded you. sharing the gospel, that God is sovereign, that God is good, that we are significant human beings made in the image of God, but fallen in sin, not trusting Him, not honoring Him, away from Him, broken away from Him, and having no eternal hope. This is the reality. We need to tell this to people, but also the hope in Jesus, that Jesus came to overcome this hurtful, to overcome sin, to overcome death. Now, if we go back and make the comparison between Esther and Jesus, then Esther is a type of mediator, right? Just like Jesus is a mediator and the only mediator. Now, Esther was the only one to mediate because she was both Jew and royal. Jesus is our mediator between man and God because he was both human and divine. Now, the people in the time of Esther were under the judgment of Haman. We, without Jesus, are under the judgment of God Himself. Esther saves about 15 million from Xerxes. Jesus saved billions from Satan, sin, and death. Esther said, if I perish, I perish. In other words, if I have to die to save my people, I die. Sound familiar? Yeah. Jesus. He's an even better mediator. Let's sing to King Jesus again.